I'm Jim Check. You're watching Kelowna Now. I'm here with Kent Mulgat and our guest this morning, Kevin Falcon, the leader of the official opposition. He's in town making an announcement. Maybe first start off and tell us about the announcement you made.
Sure. Well, it builds on an announcement I actually made 2 years ago when we came out with our policy for mental health and addictions called Better as Possible. And Better as Possible is essentially a complete and dramatic shift away from what the current NDP government is doing with respect to looking after those that are most vulnerable and getting us to a different place so that we get different results. And part of that announcement I made 2 years ago is that we would build 500 seats across the province of what are called complex care beds. These are for those that are struggling with untreated mental health or addictions issues that are incapable of making decisions in their own best interest. And that's where government needs to step in and say, we are going to take you off the streets involuntarily if necessary, and put you into proper, secure care for up to 2 years so that they can get their underlying issues treated with, whether it's the untreated mental health or the addiction issues, the psychology and psychiatric treatments to deal with sometimes underlying traumas, but get them to a better place. And we think that that is at minimum what government owes in terms of a duty of care to those folks. And by the way, in a community like Kelowna, that will have a dramatic positive impact on a lot of the prolific offenders that you often hear about. These are folks that are constantly having to engage with police, paramedics, firefighters. They're constantly in and out of the system, and they're often making decisions because they can't make good decisions in their own best interest. So that's a really important step. The other piece that we said is that in addition to that, we would end the reckless decriminalization program that the NDP brought in a number of years ago. And it's been a total disaster. We put a hard and fast end to that. And we would move away from free drugs for people struggling with addiction and move towards free treatment so that those that need treatment, those that have a child or perhaps a family member that needs addiction treatment is not going to not get that treatment because of the barrier of cost. So we want to make sure that we eliminate those barriers, get them into the treatment they need so that we can start seeing better and safer streets.
So that announcement was 100 beds?
100 beds
when
for Kelowna.
When would that happen in
100
Kelowna?
beds for how many province-wide?
For Kelowna, 500 province-wide, up to 100 right here in Kelowna.
Now, hang on. So would that be 500 people who would lose their liberty and be, moved into care that they didn't necessarily?
Yeah, not all of them would lose their liberty, but we are going to change legislation so we have that ability.
Okay, so some those beds wouldn't be entirely for people who you're going to say, no, sorry, we need to help you.
Yes, it would be predominantly for that sub-cohort that is the most difficult to manage. A lot of the other folks that are struggling with mental health can get a lot of the treatment on an outpatient basis. Now, we have to do a better job of that, but working with the Canadian Mental Health Association, we can provide those kind of outpatient treatments. But this is for example, teenagers. When you've got a 13, a 14, or a 15-year-old that is getting into a drug lifestyle, is addicted, the parents are desperately trying to get help for their child. The government views them as mature minors that can make their own decisions in their own best interest. That's absurd. We need to save those children before they end up as that 55-year-old that spent 30 years, on the streets in an addiction lifestyle.
But there is an important human rights debate that will be taking place around that you'll be facing.
Absolutely, and I'm so happy to have that debate because, I look at it this way, just as a human being. If you saw me 3 years from now, God forbid, that I suddenly was beset with some sort of untreated mental health issue, and you saw me wandering the streets of Kelowna being exploited by drug dealers, yelling and screaming to no one in particular, at risk to myself and increasingly others, I would hope that you guys, as people that knew me, said, God, we can't leave Falcon like that. We've got to get him help, right? That's not right. Well, so, I would hope that somebody would look after me, and that's where government has a role to play. And right now, government takes the position, we can't, offend their civil liberties. Well, my God, how, they then have to ask the question, how is it compassionate to leave people like we are right now, left to their own devices, that are sometimes with open wounds, left on the streets, that are being exploited, abused, trafficked, preyed on by drug dealers, et cetera. It's not right.
Does you have a timeline for that?
Yes, very quickly. I've said that we when we announced it 2 years ago, said we would move immediately on the construction of these facilities. At the same time, we would then work with the colleges, the universities to make sure that we're expanding the training spaces so that we've got the proper psychiatrists, doctors, nurses, care aides that are going to look after these folks. And there's another knock-on benefit that Dr. Michael Humer, one of our candidates here in Kelowna Centre, talked about, and that is that it frees up in the hospitals the beds that are currently held by sometimes very violent and unpredictable patients that shouldn't be in a hospital setting, that need to be in this kind of a secure setting where they can be properly looked after with proper psychiatric and medical supports. And that will reduce the violent interactions with nurses and doctors that are increasingly taking place.
You were fairly vocal on X on Friday. Big news out of the BC government that Adrian Dix and Bonnie Henry stepped to the microphone and rescinded the vaccine mandate and the public health crisis, I guess. Mm-hmm. The emergency's over. Adrian Dix made some statements while he was there, and he said that they never tried to divide people, that they're very supportive of the people that wanted to make that decision. Nonsense. That's not the way I remember it, but what's your thoughts to that?
I'm sorry, but that's just total nonsense. I called for unvaccinated healthcare workers to be allowed back into the workforce 2 years ago, okay? And over the last 2 years, I've had nothing but cynicism, snide remarks, attacks by the NDP, by Dix, by all of their left-wing followers about how irresponsible my position was. But you go look at the charts from 2 years ago, what the COVID rate of infections are, and you look at today, and they are virtually indistinguishable. For the last 2 years, because of, I've said this before, I'll say it again, because of NDP ideology that was not founded on science or evidence, we were the only jurisdiction in North America that was still punishing these workers. And at a time that we're in the midst of a healthcare crisis where we've had 55 emergency room shutdowns in Interior Health just in the month of July alone in Interior and Northern Health, that is unacceptable that we continue to sideline these workers.
The Merritt Mayor was quite vocal in this when we reached out and got an update to that story because I think around 19, I don't know if I got that number right, around 19 closures for that hospital alone.
That's right.
He says they only need one doctor to run that hospital. 2 doctors left Merritt because of that. Mm-hmm. He's hoping to get one of them back. What do you say to those people? Like, there's a call from Pierre Poilievre to pay back pay to these people to entice them back. How do we get them back to work? How do we get the nurses back? How do we get the doctors back? I think Rustad has also called for back pay. What's your position on that?
Well, my position is, first of all, as I said at the announcement I was interviewed earlier, I said, first of all, the government should apologize to these folks. I think that they have been really mistreated. They've been dealt with terribly. Just asking them to come back, I don't think is enough. I think there should be some financial compensation given what they've gone through, the impact it's had on their families. And many of them, unfortunately, have already left British Columbia. I know many, many nurses and some doctors that have moved to other jurisdictions like Alberta, and we may never get them back. But I think it would start with Dr. Bonnie Henry and Adrian Dix apologizing for the impact that they've had on their lives, for making decisions based on a misplaced ideology instead of evidence and science.
They did admit that they could have done this a few months earlier.
A few months? They could have done this 2 years ago.
And then just the part that sticks with me is where Dick said, like, we weren't trying to divide. I respect the people that made those decisions. And I think I remember somebody saying that these people have no place in healthcare. That's what I remember hearing.
Yeah, no, they made all kinds of comments like that and really singled them out. Look, I'll give you one story very quickly. I know you're dying to talk. Just very quickly, one doctor said to me, she got the first vaccination, had a very bad impact on this doctor, and she said she's not anti-vaccine. It's just that it had such a negative impact on her that she didn't want to get the second shot. And because of that, she was being punished, singled out, as if she was doing something wrong. We cannot have highly trained medical doctors like that sidelined because of this misplaced ideology.
Okay, I can hear, and I think it's fair to disagree with what should be the plan about re-employing these nurses after the fact. But
doctors and nurses.
Doctors and nurses.
Yeah.
But at the time when these people were being relieved of their duties, in the middle of a pandemic, having staff members who are not following the plan is something that I think a lot of people agreed with. And I didn't hear any criticisms from BC United at that time.
No, yeah, you're correct. Actually, I don't think there was a huge argument against at the time we're in the midst of the crisis that having those folks not working in the hospital setting made some sense. I don't think there'd be too much argument around that. The issue was they wouldn't bring them back even when there was no evidence to support keeping them out. And that's why when I called for them to be returned 2 years ago, it was based on the fact that I looked around and said, wait a minute, why are we still sidelining these folks? We should be bringing them back. And that was their opportunity to do it. They refused to, and up until...
So for you, it's a timing thing, right?
Well, it's more than the timing. I think it's politics.
Yeah.
They're doing it 2.5 months before an election because they're worried about this issue arising in the election.
But isn't there a valid point to be made that if you've got a staff member with a now proven track record of saying, no, I'm not going to listen to this directive, that is a problematic element for someone to bring back in and to work for you?
No, because they've got the right to have concerns or express their concerns about the impact that the vaccinations or the shots would have. That's why they were not coming to work, and so they were.
Dick said that himself.
Yeah,
he just said they had the right, and he respects that decision.
They had the right to self-select and not come into the workforce, and that was their right to make that decision. The issue was as the end of the crisis, came about. Like 2 years ago when I called for them to be returned, the rate of COVID vaccinations is very similar to what it is today. And as more and more jurisdictions were bringing the healthcare worker back, the only jurisdiction that refused to do so was British Columbia, literally the last one in North America. And I kept asking as recently as a month ago, why are you continuing to punish these workers? And they would continue to attack me for suggesting.
Ken tries to make the point that it's a behavioral issue, and then I say, well, if it is a behavioral issue, then we've seen nurses and doctors do other things and they get a 2-week sentence or whatever, suspension. But these people had basically a lifetime suspension up until Friday. Mm-hmm. And Dick's, what he said on Friday is that it wasn't a behavioral issue. It was their choice, and they were entitled to that choice. Mm-hmm. So then it can't be a behavioral issue.
Well, they're entitled to that choice, but until recently not entitled to their jobs back.
That's right. In the midst of a crisis. I mean, I think it's really important to understand. You mentioned merit. I can tell you just one nurse in an emergency department can be the difference between it being open and closed. And, just here in Interior Health, we've had 27 emergency department closures in July alone.
Yeah.
I can tell
we
you
do that news release almost every day.
Yeah, it is a substandard of care that folks in the interior and the north in particular are receiving right now. And this is the product of 8 years of chronic mismanagement of our healthcare system, made worse by the fact that we're punishing those healthcare workers.
Other topics on your
money.
list?
You put out a press release, I think today, or was it on Friday, that you guys have raised $4+ million. And I think the BC Conservatives have raised $2 million and the NDP $7 million. Mm-hmm. So yet the polls continue to show you lagging. How does that, how do you reconcile that?
Well, the way I've always reconciled it, that, even 2.5 months out from an election, you've got a huge amount of confusion in the public in terms of polls and in terms of parties. So you've got over half the people that think they're supporting John Rustad's party are actually believing that they're supporting Pierre Poilievre's party because of the fact that they happen to have the same name, even though the parties are totally separate. So that creates confusion. We've got even, frankly, up to a quarter or more of our own supporters that aren't aware that BC United is the former BC Liberal Party. So you've got a lot of that kind of confusion out there. I think a lot of that, frankly, gets resolved once the election starts, because when the election starts, that's when people actually start to pay attention. And when they pay attention, they're going to look around and say, okay, I've got to make a big decision here. I'm unhappy with where the direction of the province. I'm unhappy with the state of the healthcare system, crime, drugs, and what's happening with our natural resource sector. So what are my choices? And they're going to be looking for leadership, experience, candidates, both MLAs that are running for re-election, but also quality of candidates. And I think you look at our candidates just here in Kelowna, and that tells you a lot.
Okay, let's help create a little more separation then between yourself and John Rustad. You talk about things like experience and whatnot, but are there policy matters that you could maybe lay out for us, or at least one where you truly would offer a different choice than the things that Rustad's talking about?
Very much so. So that's the thing. I think the one thing the public are going to see about BC United and Kevin Falcon is that I care a lot about policy. Our Better is Possible mental health and addiction policy was actually announced 2 years ago. We announced our economic platform that said, for example, we are going to balance the budget within our first term in office to make clear to the public that we are going to stop this reckless debt and deficit spending that this government has embarked upon, recognizing the impact that that's having on future generations. We've laid out healthcare policy over a month ago, which interestingly, John Rustad largely copied when he announced his, which is fine. Flattery, imitation is the best form of flattery. But our policy said, for example, that we were going to make sure that if someone's languishing on a healthcare wait list, that we're going to get them treated in a private clinic. If necessary, we got no problem with that. Publicly funded, privately delivered. We'll make sure it happens, because at the end of the day, we're not going to let ideology get in the way of outcomes. We're going to focus on looking after patients and getting them done. And I think you'll see as we go into this campaign, we're going to be the one group that has well thought out policies and a plan to fix the challenges we face in British Columbia. And United, we think we can fix it, and United will win.
We've talked, you and I have talked, or the three of us have talked about forestry management in British Columbia, the second largest employer. And it seems to be, as wildfires continue to make the headlines, and we've seen the disaster in Jasper, and we're seeing some of the stuff happen around BC. What's the plan for BC United for better forest management?
Yeah, this is really, really frustrating for me, because again, we announced a very detailed changes that we would make to forest firefighting practices in British Columbia, and really encourage the government. I'm literally laying this stuff out for them so that they can, I don't care if they steal our ideas, I just want to see some action, because the action needs to happen between forest firefighting seasons. And so, for example, we said what we need to do is create a year-round professionalized firefighting service that will pay folks well, have it be a full-time job, provide them the proper equipment, including helicopters with night vision equipment, making sure they got the right bombers and planes available to go and attack these fires properly, make sure that we work with local contractors, especially in the forestry sector, that have the ability and the skill set and the people to go and attack these fires early, making sure that between forest firefighting seasons, we're getting out there and we're thinning the canopy in a lot of these areas, so that we allow the sunshine to get through and not have a forest floor that's extremely dry and brittle, where one lightning strike can cause a huge amount of forest fires immediately. So there's a bunch of things that we can do, and the reason I like the idea of a year-round firefighting service is that we can also rent them out to other jurisdictions, whether it's California, Mexico, Australia, that are also battling firefires. We can turn it into a revenue opportunity for BC too during our down season. So I just think that we have to look at this issue and we have to embrace it as an opportunity.
But in the forestry sector alone, Merritt used to have 6 mills. There's 0 there operating right now. The forestry companies say they could be part of the solution in putting in more breaks and managing and having a younger forest out there instead of old dead trees and stuff. Mm-hmm. There's complaints out of Merritt saying they weren't even allowed to cut down burnt trees.
I know.
They can't get the permitting. Why do you think this government is putting a roadblock in there for active forest management, allowing the CANFORs and the AP groups to cut trees?
Because they haven't learned how to execute. I can't believe that they just don't want to see people getting out and going in, for example, and cutting down wood that's already burnt and still has some value if it's harvested early enough. I just can't imagine the government does not see the obvious need for going and doing that. The problem is we've got permit paralysis right across the province. The biggest complaint you'll hear from the natural resource sector, whether it's mining or forestry or what have you, is that they can't get this government to issue permits, in spite of the fact that they've increased the civil service by 140,000 plus full-time employees in just over 7 years, a 36% increase in bureaucracy. They still can't issue a bloody permit. And so I can tell you what we're going to do is we're going to make sure the permits get issued and we return certainty to the natural resource sector. Everyone knows the industry has to change, and that's fine. They just need to know what are the rules of the game so that they can make investments and know that they're going to have some certainty and timeliness around permits.
I'd still like to hear you disagree with John Rustad on something. I'm going to take another stab at it here on the related topic of climate change. Yeah. And I'm going to do my best to paraphrase John Rustad. but he more or less said that the money that's being invested to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions is not worthwhile, because even if we had some level of success, the amount that BC contributes to the worldwide situation is negligible. So let's just instead invest in the things we just talked about.
Okay.
In other words, let's not waste our efforts trying to reduce emissions. We're just too small in the grand scheme of things worldwide.
Okay, I think I would agree with portions of that part of what John is saying. That's more recent conversations he's had. Where I would disagree with John very vehemently is the comments he made just a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago in the Globe and Mail, where he denied that climate change is real, that it's human caused, or that there's any kind of crisis. That's a pretty remarkable statement for the leader of a party in British Columbia, when we are dealing with forest fires right now and have been every year since 2017 virtually. We've had massive floods in the Fraser Valley. Clearly climate change is happening. So I fundamentally disagree with him on that point, for sure. I think climate change is real. I think how we deal with it, though, requires some common sense. And this is where John and I are a little more aligned. Penalizing and punishing British Columbians, especially by just trying to take money out of their pockets with this NDP government's carbon tax, is not the right approach. What we can do is say, look, British Columbia represents 0.03% of global emissions, okay? And put that in perspective, we could shut down the entire province of British Columbia, turn off every light, park every car, and it's less than 2.5 days emissions out of China. So that's why I say let's fish where the fish are. Let's help China and India get off of coal-fired power and help them dramatically reduce their emissions by sending them something we have lots of, which is liquefied natural gas. That's why we supported LNG. That's why the NDP opposed it. We supported it. And by getting our LNG over to Asia, we can reduce their emissions by 50%, which is like shutting down all of Canada.
So you would eliminate the carbon tax that your party introduced?
Yes, because the carbon tax that the NDP, they've changed it, remember. We introduced a tax shift. It wasn't a tax grab. What we said is that every dollar generated from our carbon tax, BC Liberal carbon tax, had to go towards reducing taxes, either both personal income taxes and small business taxes. What the NDP did in 2017 is they said, well, forget this giving it back to them stuff. We're going to take it all into government. And then they more than doubled it. And now they increased it again by 23% on April the 1st, and they want to more than double it again over the next 6 years.
You wouldn't want to bring it back to something similar to what your party or your party's predecessor introduced in the first place?
No. And I think the reason we can't do that is because what's happening now is I think the whole discussion has changed. The federal government is likely to change. If it does, Pierre Poilievre has been clear that he's going to eliminate the federal carbon tax altogether. That's why we have said the good thing about our BC carbon tax, it is a BC designed carbon tax. So what we can do in the interim is we can say no more increases, which I've committed to. We can take it off the agricultural and ranching sector immediately, which I've agreed we would do. And we've said that if the federal government changes and they eliminate the federal carbon tax, the BC carbon tax is gone too, because I'm not going to be the only jurisdiction in the country with a carbon tax. Now, what I won't do though, and this is where John Rustad and I differ again very dramatically, is he said he's just going to axe the BC tax. Well, what that means, because there's a federal carbon tax that backstops ours, you get rid of the BC carbon tax, you're now sending $2.6 billion a year to Ottawa. There's no bloody way I want to see us sending our money to Ottawa when we can use it here.
So we saw an interesting LinkedIn post, and it was put out by, I think, stepping down as the role of the CEO of the BC Hotel Association. And in her celebration where she's saying what she got done, she mentions that she spearheaded research and legislative changes for the province's short-term rental policy. So, curious was corporate lobbyists in there affecting the decision on the Airbnb policy for British Columbia, as opposed to, like they said, it was all about getting more rental homes out there. But it sounds like corporate lobbyists to me. I'm just curious if that's true. We're gonna reach out and get some information on that, some pre-information stuff on that, and see if corporate lobbyists, because there's a lot of small businesses in Kelowna and small like a mom and pop that had, had some extra money and invested into property and had that taken away. And if it was corporate lobbyists that did it to better the hotel association, that doesn't seem like that was what was told to British Columbians.
First of all, it was, and that's why they were one of the few groups that actually came out in support of the NDP's announcement at the time, was the Hotel Association. And I get why it's in the hotel.
For sure, you can see why, right?
Of course. In Vancouver, we already saw, and we warned the NDP about this, major events are going to come to town, like Taylor Swift, for example, next year. And already there was an article in the newspaper about a couple from Florida that were trying to, get a hotel room so that they could bring their daughter to watch Taylor Swift, and they were quoted $2,300 that night for the Days Inn. Well, I can tell you right now, you're already seeing dramatic increases in hotel room rates here in Kelowna and in the Lower Mainland. Kelowna tourism is already down. I was just talking about this with the media before I came here. Tourism's already down because why? Well, there's not enough alternative rooms available. And so that creates pressure on hotel room rates, supply and demand, prices go up, and that makes it hard for families.
For the $2,300 a night, does that include a microwave?
Well, and the other thing, this is what's so frustrating about the NDP. We actually put forward amendments to try and save them from themselves. We said, look, we know what you're trying to achieve here. There's a way you can do it, recognizing that a small percentage of Airbnb operators actually generate almost half their revenue. And there are people that do it for a business. They've got 15, 20 units. That's their business. Okay, go after those folks. But don't go after the mom and pop that might own one place. We said exempt the people that have one place. We've said make exemptions for large major events, whether it's FIFA 2026 or whether it's Taylor Swift or what have you.
Just open it up for those.
Exactly. Open it up to allow more supply to come into the marketplace. We had all these examples of things. Oh, and we also said exempt people like doctors that are traveling around doing locum work, which is where they come to a community.
Doctors,
yeah, like Kelowna, and they don't want to live in a hotel. They bring their families, they stay right on the lake, they rent an Airbnb, and they do it, and that's why they'll practice up here. In Vernon and Kelowna and Penticton, et cetera. When you start to close off those doors, now you're going to start to affect the healthcare system. And finally, people that are traveling for healthcare, down to the Lower Mainland, for example. Airbnbs are hugely important when they bring their families and the loved ones trying to get care in VGH or St. Paul's or what have you. Now, if hotel rooms are the only answer, they can't afford to pay $600 or $700 a night in the middle of summer.
This is a different message that was than what was told to us. It was like all about protecting the whatever the lower people that are trying to get rental properties. It didn't mention that it was supporting like corporations getting more, making more money. That seems odd to me, and it seems like that, that might be something that we're worth exploring.
Oh, of course. Look, obviously it's a huge benefit to the hotel industry, and they're going to benefit from be able to charge far higher rates because it's a supply and demand business. Mm-hmm. If you take out tens of thousands of potential rooms that people, tourists particularly, like to come and stay in, because not every family likes to stay in a hotel room. You eliminate that opportunity, obviously you're going to drive up hotel
It's one thing,
rates.
though, to benefit from the legislation. You'd say, oh, that was a really good win for us. But it's another thing to go in there and lobby for it.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, we don't have the extent of that. But, okay, so obviously you would have a different approach on Airbnbs. But what about a BC United government and dealing with the issue of housing affordability and crazy high rents?
Yeah, well, so again, we didn't get into this problem overnight. We're not going to get out of it overnight. When I retired as a finance minister and deputy premier in 2013, I went into the private sector. I was actually in the home building business, and we were building and selling townhomes in Surrey, 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom, double garages for $375,000 to $400,000. That was actually affordable housing. But, now after 8 years of NDP government, we've got the most unaffordable housing in North America. We've got the highest average rents in Canada. And that's because of an accumulation of decisions they made. Primarily what they did is they said, oh, I see, we've got a housing problem. Let's add a whole blizzard of costs and taxes onto housing. That was their response. And they did nothing to deal with the supply issue. So now too late in the game, they say, oh my God, they panic because they've gotten the worst outcomes in the country. So now they quickly try to say, well, let's try and solve this with legislation from Victoria saying every single family neighborhood now and every single family lot, you can build up to 4 houses. Well, they don't know what they're doing. They don't understand that in many communities, you're going to have to make huge upgrades to sewer, water, power. It's going to have massive financial impacts that's not going to create affordable housing. And so this is the problem. They don't know what they're doing. And the reason we are in the pickle we're in right now is because they hadn't been encouraging supply over the last 8 years. And now they're trying to do it too late in the game. And they're trying to use a big hammer from Victoria by a group of people, none of whom have a background in the housing sector. Not a good recipe for success.
We thank you for your time. Is there anything else that we didn't cover off? We got some passion in you for sure.
Yeah, well, it's, look, here's what I'll just say. I'm frustrated because, here we are in this unbelievable province, the place where most people in this country want to live. And we're now in a situation where for the first time since all the way back to the 1990s, the last time the NDP were in government, we're seeing more out-migration than in-migration, meaning that we have more people leaving British Columbia to other provinces than are coming from other provinces into BC. It has always been the case that everyone wants to come to BC. But last year, we lost 70,000 more people out of BC than came into BC from other parts of the province. Why? Because this is the most unaffordable province in the country under the NDP. And those 70,000 people, sadly, many of them young people, are going to live in other provinces like Alberta, where housing is cheaper, taxes are lower, and opportunities are greater.
And capital's leaving now too.
Absolutely. Oh, capital is like a huge flight of capital out of BC. So we've got to get things fixed and back on track. And to do that, we need leadership, we need experience, and we need great quality candidates. And that's why.
Do you have a full house yet?
We're getting close. We're getting close. Yeah.
And then your full platform, when can we see that?
You'll see that at the launch of the campaign for sure. And it's going to be very detailed. It'll cover all the different areas of the economy. And people will be able to look at that and judge and say, you know what? I think these people know what they're talking about. And we need someone that's got experience and leadership to fix these problems. Oh. Not a professional politician, by the way, because frankly, they're a problem too. We need someone that's got private sector experience like I have, but has also got the public sector
Well, we
experience.
thank you for coming into Kelowna now. Again, media is not exactly doing as well as it can either. We've seen that with the global cuts recently. Yeah. Local independent media is having a tough slug, and we thank you for affording us your time. You've always been very generous with your time.
No problem. Thanks, Jim and Ken. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching Kelowna Now.